I was just coming out so that you know where Dana comes from. So we have the international conference going on of Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung and the International Rosa Luxemburg Society, which is like going started yesterday, and it's going all day long today with in total like 10 sessions. And Dana just did a wonderful panel together with Helen Scott and Kate Evans, who did the graphic novel about Rosa Luxemburg, on Rosa Luxemburg and literature, I guess, which was like unbelievable seeing the three of you together, you know, going through very close. Before that, I was chairing a panel where we discussed with Leah Ippi from the London School of Economics and Michael Brie and Joshua Varong from France, the challenges of political strategy. So a large discussion about reform and revolution and the view on the Russian Revolution of Rosa Luxemburg that was very lively as well. And there are gonna be much more panels, and we have a production of, I can later on also show you some, because we produced a new Rosa Luxemburg website. I just do all this advertising for using the time, so we don't have to do it later. We produced a new website on Rosa Luxemburg that was done here in Berlin. I'm going to send you the link, which we translated into Spanish, French, English, and Polish already, where there's also a lot of material to listen. You also could listen to letters of Rosa Luxemburg, for example, in Spanish as well. And what we also could have done, because we produced some new films, you will find there as well. Also one where you see Dana a lot, done by Paul Mason, if you're interested in some of the major works.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, wonderful. So I just want to go over a few housekeeping notes before we start the event. First of all, there is a Spanish interpretation if you need that. So if you click the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen, you can click either English or Spanish. So just bear that in mind if you need that. And we are recording this event and we'll be sharing it later. And it's also streaming on Facebook. And I think that's it for housekeeping. And now I would just like to introduce Natalia Caruso from MADRE to say a few words.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Rosa Luxemburg, New York office. And thank you to everyone that is joining us today for this important conversation. I am Natalia Caruso from MADRE, an international women's human rights organization. And on behalf of RLS and MADRE, we would like to welcome all of you to this panel conversation about Rosa Luxemburg's legacy among scholars and activists. Today, March 5th, we celebrate Rosa's 150th birthday as a feminist, as a visionary, and as a trailblazer for social justice. MADRE is pleased to co-sponsor this event and to invite to this celebration some of our indigenous partners who are at the forefront of mobilization against militarism, violence, and injustices. In their struggle, women and young activists are leading a fight for social, economic, and climate justice in Kenya, in Guatemala, and in Nepal. In Rosa's own words, the most revolutionary thing one can do is always to proclaim loudly what is happening. And today, we continue to celebrate the spirit and vision for Rosa, from supporting young women protesters in Myanmar to building peace in communities across Yemen to mobilizing for climate justice with indigenous youth in the US. To honor her legacy and continue with her revolutionary spirit, we invite you to listen to our speakers and to join us as we celebrate Rosa's legacy around the world. Thank you, and I'll pass now the mic to Andreas Gunther, the Executive Director from Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, New York office. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia, and thank you for co-sponsoring this event for, as you said, the 150th anniversary of Rosa Luxemburg's birthday. Welcome to all of you. Good morning to the Americas, good afternoon to Europe, and good evening to Asia. Well, it's really great to have such a welcome. Good to use the skills that we learned during the pandemic for such events. Rosa Luxemburg, who is the namesake of our foundation, an international operating non-for-profit organization, think tank, based in Berlin, Germany, with offices around the world, which is dedicated to promote the left and progressive thinking. And that is the point why we want to celebrate Rosa Luxemburg's very different aspects. She has been, of course, a Marxist theorist, but she has also been a botanist, zoologist. We celebrated that 2 years ago with an exhibition in the Goethe Institute in New York. She wrote as an economist, a national economist, about accumulation of capital, which is very much intertwined with colonialism in the world. So she was a politician in the Social Democratic Party of Germany and co-founder of the Communist Party of Germany. And as such, she was a revolutionary. She was a fiery writer with a very strong language, and she was a literate. She was also a handicapped person, so she did not talk that much about that, as far as I know. Maybe the experts will able to correct me, but I didn't find much about that. But it was part of her personality, and it was reflected by her contemporaries. And she was simply a woman who wanted to live a free life, and lived a free life in a time when that was not common at all. And that is also one of her legacies. So we chose this day to see her in a different view. We wanted to know, as an international operating organization, what does her legacy mean to women around the world with whom we partner through MADRE. Thank you again. And what does they know about Rosa Luxemburg? What they know means to them, and how far she is an inspiration for the struggles today? What can we draw out of her legacy? We chose the title of this panel today, despite of anything and everything, out of one of her letters. And I would like to read a short passage from this letter, where we draw it from. So letter she wrote in December 1916, during the First World War, being in prison in Wronke, in what is now Poland. She wrote at the end of the year, and looking at the new year, then to her friend Mathilde Wurm, then see that you remain a human being. To be a human being is the main thing above all else. And that means to be firm and clear and cheerful. Yes, cheerful in spite of everything and anything, because howling is the business of the weak. To be a human being means to joyfully toss your entire life on the giant scales of fate, if it must be so, and at the same time to rejoice the brightness of every day and the beauty of every cloud. I think that says a lot about her being, on the one hand, a revolutionary, on the other hand, looking at the brightness of life every day. And so in this sense, we invited women from all over the world, and I will stop talking soon after I introduce them. So give the women the space today to talk about their thoughts on this day. And I will introduce the panelists first, and then give them the floor, and we will have a moderated conversation afterwards, and hopefully have the time to open up to questions and from the audience. And audience can put their questions already while people are talking in the using either the Q&A part in the bottom menu or the chat, and we will try to answer as many as them. We welcome today on the panel. We welcome today on the panel Ana Ceto Chavez, who is an indigenous women leader from the Ixil region of Arequipa, Guatemala. Ana serves as the coordinator of MUJIL, I hope I pronounced it right, an organization that promotes and defends human rights of indigenous women and their communities. MUJIL is composed of women survivors of the Mayan genocide. Ana also leads the Ixil Women's Weaving Collective, which creates a sustainable source of income for women and their families. Ana recently obtained her degree in legal and social sciences from the University of San Carlos in Guatemala. She is the first indigenous woman in her community to receive a law degree. She has been vital in advocacy and demanding restitution and recognition from the Guatemalan government for the genocide committed against the indigenous community. She also engages women in her community to actively participate in civic and political activities. Welcome, Ana, and glad to have you here. Next participant that I want to welcome is Mrs. Pratima Gurung. She is a leading academic activist from Nepal. She's an indigenous woman with disability from a hilly rural region in Nepal. She has an extensive background in human rights with a focus on disability rights, women's rights, and indigenous people's rights. Pratima uses an intersectional approach that she incorporates social inclusion. She has been instrumental in raising the voices of indigenous peoples and women with disabilities in Nepal, Asia, and the rest of the world. Pratima has played a significant role in documenting and advocating for the issues of indigenous peoples, women with disabilities in different global platforms. Pratima is currently working on a PhD in intersectional issues. Welcome, Pratima. Glad to have you here. Our third panelist is Ms. Cindy Nami Kobei. She's a human rights activist. She hails from the Ogiek indigenous community of the Mau forest in Kenya. The Ogiek are a hunter-gatherer tribe who have a long history of discrimination and eviction from their ancestral homelands. In 2017, the Ogiek people won a landmark ruling from the African court that the government of Kenya violated the rights of the Ogiek tribe and repeatedly evicting them from their ancestral territory. Mrs. Kobei has a background in law and indigenous people's rights. She's a recent law graduate from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology and was a 2020 participant of the Global Leadership School for Indigenous Women by FIMI. And the third person on the panel is Donna Mills. Very welcome to you. She is a political theorist, lecturer, campaigner for socialist feminism and anti-racism, a dancer, and the author of Dance and Politics, Moving Beyond Boundaries, and most recently, a biography of Rosa Luxemburg, which we were also proud to present. That is the reason why one of the reasons why we invited her to give us some new, let us know about some of the new insights that came out of writing this book. And we are very curious to hear you. Welcome, Dana. And last but not least, Johanna Busamner, who is also an activist, has been working in politics for a long time, used to be advisor to the parliamentarian group of Die Linke in the Bundestag in foreign policies, active in women's movement, LGBT movement, and now working for the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung's headquarters in Berlin for I don't know how many years, quite a long time, and is actually at the moment responsible of the unit for Europe in the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung. Welcome, Johanna, great to see you. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dana to give us her view on Rosa. What does she mean to her? How is Rosa's feminism fitting into the 21st century? Dana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. This is truly one of the most interesting panels, just looking at the panelists, and I'm really excited to hear your contributions. A little bit about myself and why I ended up writing about Rosa Luxemburg. I am also an activist. I was brought up in Israel, where I joined the pro-Palestinian Israeli left when I was 13 through the movement Peace Now. And as a Jewish woman who is dissenting against a certain brand of nationalism and colonialism, for me, Rosa Luxemburg was always a figure who was in the background. And I consider myself speaking from the wrong side of history as an Israeli. So for me, having, again, a voice that comes from within my own tradition, speaking very strongly about these issues was very inspiring. And I will talk very briefly about the sort of main points for us, perhaps, to start from on Rosa's life, just so we kind of start from an equal ground. So Rosa Luxemburg was a Jewish, Polish, middle-class child, really, of the Russian Empire. She was thrice oppressed, once as a woman, second as a Jew, third as a Polish citizen of empire. She was born in 1871, exactly, that's why we're celebrating 150th birthday. And she was really educated in the Polish resistance to nationalism. Now, it's really interesting that in the period of her upbringing, supporting Polish nationalism was very much the central opinion, even of the left. Marx and Engels supported Polish nationalism. Elena Marx, who was a contemporary of Rosa Luxemburg, supported Polish nationalism, but Rosa dissented against that. She was all her life very skeptical of what nationalism and what that might do. And she joined an anti-nationalist party when she was a teenager, and she saw the leaders of that party being executed for their opinions, something that really made her passionate about democracy and about the right to express oneself, including on the left, something that I think is really crucial for us to think about today. In 1898, I'm jumping ahead a bit in her timeline, she intervenes against Engels's most famous student then, Edward Bernstein, who claimed that capitalism will never collapse, there will never be a revolution, which of course was the central claim of Marx, but rather we should settle for a series of reforms that better the life of workers in the here and now. And Rosa said, she wrote her very famous pamphlet, Reform or Revolution, in which she said, of course, we need to campaign for reforms that make people's lives better, but the revolution is the goal of every socialist movement. And by that, she basically put herself as the left outlier of many of the movements of her time and intervened in international socialism, where she became an instant star and a celebrity, despite being completely an outsider. In 1905, there was the first big revolution that she saw in her time, which is the first Russian Revolution. And she went disguised as a journalist. She was incredibly brave, despite being disabled, despite having bad health, and her entire life, she really lived at the front line of social justice. And she went to cover what was going on in Russia. And out of that revolution that started by a series of strikes, she wrote a very important pamphlet also called The Mass Strike, Political Party and Trade Unions, where she talks about the fact that revolutionary consciousness happens on the ground through processes of strikes and is not something that is indoctrinated from leaders. And by so doing, she upset, her entire life, she basically upset various people by being too left to them. That's something I found by writing about her. And when she writes The Mass Strike, she basically upsets the leaders of the trade unions in Germany, who were then quite conservative and wanted to organize the workers from above and tell them what to do. And she said, any revolution has to start by socialism from below. In 1913, she writes her great work, The Accumulation of Capital, in which she ties together capitalism and imperialism and says that imperialism is the last stage of capitalism and must be objected to. Again, her party then, the SPD, is still quite supportive of German imperialism and doesn't denounce it at all and says, well, you can go and exploit people across the ocean and you can do whatever you like when it's not visible to us here in Germany, but we will fight our socialist struggles. And she understood very early and very deeply that all labor relations are implicated around the world, something that I think we now take for granted in our 21st century international socialism. We know that we're all connected to each other and we're all indebted to each other. But she really understood that instinctively and very early on wrote about that. And again, upset her party by being a left outlier. And out of this position of objecting to imperialism and to imperialist policy, she objects also to the First World War, and again goes against the strand of her entire party, which then still voted for the war and thought we can support the war, but we can still be good socialists aside. She was a very brave anti-militarist and saw that war will only serve the bourgeoisie, it will only profit the rich, who will use, again, abuse workers as cannon fodder, as someone who goes and dies on the front line, while they get money out of looting property and taking advantage of other people's land, basically through war. So through her objection to the First World War, she was imprisoned again. She had been imprisoned earlier in her life, but this was the longest imprisonment she had. And from that imprisonment came the beautiful letter that Andreas chose to read to us, which is one of my favorites. So I very much enjoyed that, thank you. And during her time in prison, she is still involved in revolutionary work in Germany and beyond. She is still organizing on the ground. She writes all the time. She's still involved in the world. She also taught herself how to paint. She was a multi-talented person with various interests. But she also became much more aware of both the limits of German socialism of her time, which was becoming more and more centrist and collaborating more and more with right-wing fascists who were kind of growing out of various processes. But also she was very excited about what was going on in Russia. So in 1917, when the Russian Revolution breaks out, she sees basically the big revolution that she was waiting for her entire life. But she was also, as I said earlier, she was the biggest defender of democracy in the Marxist tradition. And when she sees that Lenin and his comrades start to censor workers and to say certain institutions, we don't need them right now, we rehabilitate them after the revolution, she writes a pamphlet called The Russian Revolution, in which she says, she writes the very famous quote, "Freedom is always and exclusively the freedom for the one who thinks differently." And that emphasis on freedom of expression on the left is something that still upsets Leninists these days. I can tell you as someone who goes and meets Leninists on a regular basis, they still don't like that quote. But I think still very much speaks to the struggles that we are living within today with the wonders of internet and Zoom and the fact that we're all connected. A lot of people think differently, and a lot of people on this panel who I'm sure we will all learn from have learned the hard way that sometimes they're not granted the freedom they deserve. Rosa was actually freed from prison following the less successful than Russian Revolution, the German Revolution of 1918, in which workers started a mutiny in Kiel as a result of the First World War. This revolution never took hold in the same way as the Russian Revolution and never took the imagination and the left support just like the Russian Revolution did. And Rosa actually knew that from the beginning. And there's one really funny letter in which she basically says, Germans would only start a revolution if their train doesn't leave on time. She did not see the passion that she saw in other workers organizing around the world. But she still tried, as ever as she did in throughout her entire life, to agitate and to push revolutionary socialism from below. And while she doesn't know what will happen to her, and she's living from day to day, and she's in hiding after she's released from prison, she still organizes and tries to push the revolutionary forces to the left, and is very mildly but involved in the Spartacus uprising of January 1919, when again workers are trying to push what was then a social democracy, but a very centrist and not very able social democracy, try to push it to the left and to make it really what she saw as social democracy. But she is unsuccessful. And on the 15th of January in 1919, she is murdered by a collaboration between centrist social democrats and the Freikorps, which were far-right militias, far-right proto-fascist militias, who later would become very central to the rise of Hitler. And there's something very poignant about her life, because in 1915, she writes that the choice is always between socialism and barbarism. And really her death signaled the beginning of the demise into barbarism. And I think many on the panel will educate us on what this choice means to them. And I'm really excited for that. So I will stop talking here, and I'm very much looking forward to contributions and to discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dana, for this great contribution and framing the or setting the frame by telling us about Rosa's life. So now I would like to give the floor to Cindy Kobei. I'm asking her the struggle that you had for your land to be recognized by the government. What connection do you feel to Rosa's struggle to create a more just, equal, social, just world? Cindy, please.
Greetings to you all. Thank you so much for having me, RLS ex Madre. And Rosa Luxemburg was a revolutionary feminist who continues to inspire many activists, including myself. What inspires me the most is the fact that whenever people would tell her to tone it down, she would speak louder. And for a woman for her time, she started a revolution that has lasted for a long time, and till date we continue to celebrate her legacy, and it lives on. Method of work, especially that when she was a teacher in 1907, she taught her students more about the socialism, more about Marxism. And this strategy has applied for me, especially as an indigenous woman who is mentoring young girls. And we're also training them how to be like Rosa, how to think like her. And the education is a transforming element in the lives of people and the future of social democracy. Her work is relevant today. It continues to be relevant. And I don't think there's any time that it will be irrelevant, because the female voice is still vulnerable, and it's not time to tone it down, and we should always raise our voices. We can honor her legacy by living and doing things Rosa's way. She loved humanity, and she had a strong sensitivity for all forms of suffering. The Ogiek people have suffered for over a decade now, and what led us to take the case to the African court is because of the evictions of the Ogiek people from the Mao Forest. Mao Forest is our ancestral land, it's our home. That is where the community has been living time immemorial. The case we started officially in the Kenyan courts, but later in 2009, we were forced to take the case to the African Commission of the Human and People's Rights, which is based in Tanzania. And after tough scrutinization, the African Commission found it best to forward the case to the African Court. The African Court later ruled their decision in May 2017, where they ruled that the rights of the Ogiek community have been violated. These rights, such as the right to life, because many people died as a result of the evictions, and also due to the evictions, we lost our source of livelihood. We lost our source of food, our source of water, and also our culture is also based in the forest. The forest it's everything. When you cannot be an Ogiek community if you're not. If you don't connect with the forest, we connect with nature. And Rosa herself, she connected with nature. She was a naturalist, for lack of a better word. And also, She believed in the communal forms of living. She thought in order to understand the current ways of doing things, you need to first go back to the olden days, which is the indigenous communal forms of living. And this is all for the Uge community. To understand this, we need to go back to our home, which is our forest, the Mau Forest. Mau Forest is the biggest forest in Kenya, it is home to a lot of resources. Land is our greatest resource. It is a rich mineral resource. It has a wealth of pastures. It has waterways of the surface as it is the Kenya's water catchment area. And it is also livestock to pastoral peoples like the Maasai community, the Samburu, just to name a few. The Kenyan government, it was ruled, as I said, it was ruled that the Kenyan government violated this, the rights to culture, the rights to life. And it was ruled in May 2017, but till date, the Kenyan government has failed to implement the case. It was ruled that the government should hand over the forest back to the community, because we are the guardians of the forest, and they cannot blame the community for the destruction of the forest. What the community wants in regards to the implementation of the African Court is community titles to our ancestral lands. The community is entitled to this outcome as they are ancestral owners of the land. The Rosas struggle to create a just, equal, and social democratic world for indigenous people has also been seen in Latin America, where she found that, I'll quote in her book where she wrote The Accumulation of Wealth, she stated that for indigenous people to the only possible course of action is to engage in resistance and a life or death struggle. The form of resistance that the indigenous people of Kenya, my community, the Uge community, decided to apply is the legal action. And also, a lot of people have lost their lives due to this struggle, and the struggle continues. At the Uge Youth Council continues her legacy by ensuring that the youth have access to information. We are training these the young girls and the young women to be feminist leaders so that they can continue the struggle. Because information is power, and most of the young people do not understand the struggle, because all they see is their family members being evicted, their houses being burnt down, and their property being destroyed. And it is important that the young girls should be educated on the struggle, and we've also done this by mentoring and ensuring them that they do not drop out of school. They can continue and become strong feminist leaders like Rosa Luxemburg. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very inspiring report from your struggles and connecting that to the legacy of Rosa. Thank you so much. You already mentioned the struggle of indigenous people in Latin America, and that, so would like to hand the floor over to Anna, who will talk from the point of view of an activist in Guatemala. About Rosa's anti-militarism, and like to ask you, how do you see the connection to Guatemala and the indigenous women's activism in the war in the 1980s? And for those of you who do not speak Spanish, please do use the translation function down on the button to the right. You see this little globe, and when you click on it, you can choose English. And so Anna, the floor is yours.
Hola a todos.
Hello.
Muchas gracias por este.
Thank you for having me in this space. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this group. Thank you so much for the invitation, for coordinating, and also the support for MADRE, but also from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation that made this event possible. Personally, I feel very, very happy to have that an organization like Rosa Luxemburg. This type of event, it's honoring the legacy. She was an extraordinary woman. What I admire from her is that she studied a lot about science, even though it was during her time. Today, on her 150th anniversary, she was a woman that fought and gave all of herself to the struggles, to democracy, to peace. And the fact that she was in prison during her time in liberty, she was still restricted because of that struggle for peace. And all of her work for us is an example. It's an example through Rosa Luxemburg's history, biography. We can see that there has always been women, really strong women. That's very hopeful for us. It's an example for me. It's a motivating factor to help us in our struggle for democracy, for peace, for justice. The connection with our struggle and Rosa, we can connect in Guatemala's case starting in the years of 1960s to 1996. That was the internal armed conflict here in Guatemala during those years because of racism, exploitation, discrimination. During these times, most of the victims that were impacted were young women, also children, indigenous. And through all those violations of human rights, there was a lot of leaders and the leaders, women leaders that were impacted, they started defending themselves. And here in Guatemala, we have 22, 23 groups, and thanks to the exploitation, to discrimination, and forced disappearances, and execution, rape of women, and disappearance of children during that time, the communities, we started defending ourselves. And in that region, Mishi, where I live, and I'm also Ije, it was labeled as the guerrilla, as the warrior communities. And during that time, we fought for there were several policies that were implemented to get rid of this community. It was the intention of the government was to eliminate the Ixi community, and the women like Rosa Luxemburg, like Gilberta Menchú, the Nobel laureate, the one that fought for a lot of the communities here in Guatemala and a lot of other women. It's admirable how these women became fighters to protect and even women that are younger, the legacy is an example for us to continue in our fight and to continue against these violations, and to be able to report and for the genocide crime. And they even prosecuted the ex-president of Guatemala this month, and the other leaders, the chiefs, and but those criminal processes against those ex-government leaders in Guatemala has been a very long process. It has been a fight for a long time and a constant that it constantly there's been a push to stop. And so people here in Guatemala, it's almost similar to Rosa Luxemburg struggle. A lot of us women that have organized, we are part. I'm coordinator of the civil society. We are fighting to get a sentence, to get a punishment for these people that executed, that led the genocide, that had a lot of people die. They tried to annul that sentence. It was a punishment, and they tried as a state, a corrupt state. They tried whatever it means, discriminating. They wanted to get rid of that sentence. In that process, it's not done yet. From the region, we are in the Ishi region. We are located at 270 kilometers from the Guatemala capital. We are organized, and we continue fighting, organizing to continue that process. We, through other projects in support of the women, adults, also the young ones, the children, and I'm here, I'm representing those groups in this space, and always with MADRE's support, and also from the staff of Rosa Luxemburg. And thank you so much for, it's very motivating this to continue in our work, and also to hear the biography of Rosa Luxemburg. It's a legacy for us to continue. And we see that the women's fight has been happening for a long time. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much, Anna, for this moving words. And this shows like imperialism 150 years after Rosa Luxemburg's birthday and more than 100 years after her death, it still causes so much suffering in the world, and how important it is to continue to carry on her fight. And now I invite to the floor Pratima Gurung from Nepal. We asked her to talk about Rosa as a disabled activist. So as I said, she did not refer that much to that. And would like to ask you, how do you connect with Rosa's struggle to overcome people's prejudices? Sorry. Welcome, Pratima. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening and indigenous greetings to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank Rosa Luxemburg and MADRE for providing me this opportunity to speak and to remember and share her thoughts on Rosa's work in this amazing event. And I'm very happy and privileged to represent myself as an indigenous woman with disabilities, representing my organization, National Indigenous Disabled Women Association, Nepal. Celebrating the 150th birthday of Rosa It is a great honor for me and my community because the extraordinary work that she has done in the late 18th century as a Jewish police, political refugee, socialist, public speaker, disabled, all these identities was never sideways. Her role as a charismatic leader, activist, educator, pioneer thinker, political person with different hats, paving the way to the world is an example for us. She was born with a limp at the time and had a physical disability, and her disability was often looked down with a stigma, stereotypes, social constructed values and systems, prejudices in the then society, and she was often treated as a second-class citizen. However, if we go through her history and her life achievements, we barely find those evidences, feelings, statements, philosophy from the disability perspectives. But if we observe vividly and minutely about her philosophy of humanism, the qualities that is engulfed directly and indirectly in her life as a freedom fighter, as a socialist, radical or revolutionary, has influenced many millions' heart and minds. Her multiple identities with multiple different philosophy has also spread the seed of intersectionality with different analysis of different issues of society. As a very simple layman and as a woman, as an indigenous woman and a woman with disabilities, my people can learn so many things that she has pointed directly and set examples to the community that she belonged. Her philosophy of liberations, ordinary people's life, lives about oppressed people, freedom, opinions against the social dogmas, social inequality, sexism, ableism, economic and gender justice, struggles of the women and fight and struggle for the women education, legal rights, sisterhood, democracy and solidarity, and working in a very holistic approach are still pertinent and relevant today in the 21st century. Her family expectations of what she can achieve as a perfect woman was crucial, and she has questioned on it. Her philosophy of humanism, the principle of emancipation, social transformations, and those values and systems, principles that are even contextualized for us to shape us today. If we go through her history, we also find her angry, her anger, pain, agony towards the liberations, freedom from the exploitations, isolations, and all these isolations and exploitations and dominations are the seeds of what we experience today as a woman, as an indigenous women and women with disabilities. So her philosophy and the epistemology that she has deconstructed and paved the way for us. It is time to realize and rethink for us even today. Today, as a woman, as an indigenous woman, as a woman with disabilities, I and my community share the same realities, experiences, struggles as Rosa has to overcome in her people through the societal prejudices before 150 years. Today, my disability is seen as a sin committed as a past deed. There are many social stigmas, dehumanizing behavior, demeaning perceptions and prejudices, direct and indirect suppressions and exploitations to us and our communities. And by reading and remembering Rosa's life, it really motivates us, reminds us, and also recalls us that despite all the odds, everything's and anything, everything is possible. People with disabilities like Rosa can contribute to the society and set example to rest of the society that we are living. So by looking at her example, by looking at her life history, though her disability identity is not been dominantly expressed, however, we could see those seeds and we could see those attributes in her work and in different aspects of her realities. Today, the struggle of Rosa's life mirrors myself individually and professionally. I see myself, my work, and my community work, that how I am including my family and my society. I realized that my family was abandoned by the society. This is how I was struggling at this present moment with my bad health, but also fighting actively with a loud voice like Rosa. It is also the way that how I am intervening and creating my own space in my own constituency, beyond the constituency, like in the indigenous movement, in the disability movement, and in the marginalized movement, and how I'm being a voice for the voiceless. We see the social constructed narratives, values are imposed and harassed to people with disabilities publicly. And when I look all those things, I see that things are seen in a different way. And those different realities were the experiences of Rosa. To acknowledge Rosa's legacy, I believe that I'm setting my own values and philosophy for my community, influencing the young girls and women like her. Rosa's many struggles are the struggles and realities of 100 billion, 1 billion people with disabilities and women with disabilities. And today, celebrating her 150th birthday, it gives an immense pleasure and blessing to us to internalize and accept her humanism, feminism, philosophy, to share the struggles, achievements, and continue fighting against the odds, to build a collective solidarity, acknowledging her work about nothing about us without us in her memory. I thank you for listening me.
Thank you very much, Pratima. It was great and inspiring contribution. So we have heard from different women around the world, Europe, Asia, Latin America, Africa, and now we want to go back to the place where Rosa Luxemburg spent a big part of her life, I think most of her adult life in Berlin, where it's also the headquarters of Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. And I hand the floor over to Johanna to tell us about her thoughts, coming just from a 2 days conference about Rosa Luxemburg. So how do you see those, what you heard just about from the women around the globe?
Yeah, thank you, Andreas, for giving me the floor. And also, as I understood the idea of the program, my task is to bring a little bit some lines together. So I was not preparing like a full talk now. So I will comment a little bit from the life and work of Rosa Luxemburg, what you have said. So first of all, thank you for your contributions. I guess they all fit very well and very much into the things we are remembering right now by celebrating Rosa Luxemburg's 150th birthday. So going back to where Rosa Luxemburg lived for almost her whole life as an adult, beside the time she was still studying in Zurich, is a good start, Andreas, because my personal connection to Rosa Luxemburg is already very long, because I grew up next to the place where she was murdered, and I went to school where she lived in Friedenau. So I do remember my first meeting her when my father, who was a historian, was walking around in the city of West Berlin. Berlin was an island by this time because the war was still there. In the streets around our house, and he was telling me, look, this is where Rosa Luxemburg lived. Or when we passed by in the Tiergarten on a Sunday afternoon having our walk, he showed me the place where she was throwing into the canal. So she was a long time my neighbor before I read everything about her, and I'm very happy that I ended up working with Rosa Luxemburg Foundation almost 8 years ago, and I have the chance here to work on her also on a regular basis. I guess we tackled already here in the round and also in the last days and in the preparation. Of course, I already presented to you that we made a new homepage where, of course, was a long discussion before some of the most important aspects of Rosa Luxemburg's life and work, where it makes sense to rethink her and also try to think how we could use her for our political strategy and thinking, and that in many ways, as leftists, as women activists, as socialists, as people who have to deal with the outcome of colonization, imperialism, war, capitalism. So my colleague Micha Brie just said in the last panel we had on the political strategy on the international conference, Rosa Luxemburg could give us a compass for how we could react on the world concerning also the topics of ecology, justice, and many other things. And I guess that's one of the most important aspects that she was. Donna also presented this, and many of you were relying on that. Rosa Luxemburg we're doing like a lot of different things, which is really like impressive, because she was very active, even though she was disabled. She liked to walk and being in the nature all the time. She painted, she liked music, she had a lot of friends, she was writing enormous amount of letters, and she was also one of the first women being on stage in the social democracy in Europe at this time, translating things and also always changing the scene between, the usual political culture. She just did what you did like 120 or 30 years ago when you were in politics. So she was speaking in election campaigns and writing articles. She was responsible for the party newspaper. She was teaching in the party school of the Social Democrats. And on the other hand, she had this next life when she decided, to go to Poland to mobilize for the revolution there. And also when she decided at one point that she could not go with the direction of the Social Democrats in Germany anymore, mainly because, or like one of the big facts was their position towards the First World War. And then at one point she decided that it of course could happen, that she would die for what she would do, and she just was going her way along and doing that. And I guess this is also something which we really could, or which always interests me in her like a lot. It's not only that she was like a very strong fighter for what she was that was right or important. It's more that she had this like very deep joy of doing things, and that she kept this happiness. And so if you are interested in her letters, there's this one letter which she is writing to Sophie Liebknecht, the wife of Karl Liebknecht. She's already imprisoned since a long time. She writes to, like during the First World War, she's writing to Sophie Liebknecht, "This is already my third Christmas in the prison," and so on. And she is alone in the cell, and there's nothing around. You just hear sometimes that's what she's writing. You don't know the noise of a train very far away, or you hear the guards walking, their boots in the sand, but nothing else. And but then she writes, but then she's there lying in her cell, and as she expresses in this black sheets of darkness, and she's lying there. And then, now I quote her, "And yet my heart beats with an incomprehensible, unfamiliar inner joy, as though I were walking across a flowering meadow in brilliant sunshine." So she kept, like, in all these situations where she knew, because she did not knew that the World War would end, you know, that the whole situation would end at one point. And I mean, she died in the process, or she was murdered in the process before she saw she saw the democracy in Germany happening. And but she had this big inner joy which drove her. But on the other hand, and this is also something I guess is very important, or which we can also take with her, she was of course exhausted, and she was depressed, like in many moments. And she saw that she could not go on, but she always, you know, came back to the things which gave her like a lot of strength to go on and to stick, you know, with her way. There are some things we could not be, you know, totally sure about. So this is like, there's this discussion about, was Rosa Luxemburg a real feminist or not? And she probably would herself not considered as one, but maybe, this is what I'm always saying, it was more a strategic decision. Maybe she just saw, if she's just sticking, I mean, sticking with women's rights, of course, that must have been important, but there was not even, when Rosa Luxemburg was, you know, was doing her life, she was very often one of the first women doing the things at all. So she was one of the first women studying in Europe at all. Zurich was the only place where you could do it. That's why she left Poland very young, when she was 17, you know. And then she decided to go to Germany, even though she did not like it that much, but for political reason, because there was a lot of, you know, there was the building up of the Social Democratic Party and of socialism. So she came to Berlin, and she stayed here and was doing all that work. And some others, you know, there was the so-called in history, you say, like the first wave of feminism in Europe. Like many other women who came from an educated background like her, decided to become women activists. That was very important, of course, because without them, there would not have been the electoral vote for women at all in Germany in 1918. But Rosa Luxemburg kind of just, you know, was going by the side of all that things. She just took her right to be the speaker at the party congress. You know, she just wrote articles. She was arguing against, that was mentioned, Bernstein, but a lot of others. I mean, she was in conflict with nearly every social democrat in Germany at one point, I would say. And she never gave up, and she never was, you know, she did not want to be the one, you know, being in the corner, being like a very smart person, being there because the old white social democratic men in Germany needed like somebody strong for the women's movement, because at one point they needed the support of the women also for their power possibilities. And so I guess we have really some points we still could work with Rosa Luxemburg. On the one hand, I guess in the next decades, we should pay much more attention to her thinking about the connection she already made very early about colonialization, war, and capitalism. I guess she was unbelievable early with that, and it's still a lot of things she wrote are still valid. And they could be interesting also for our internationalist discussions, like in the places like this where we are in right now. And but we also could use her still for thinking about how to deal as the left, you know, in the system of parliamentarianism on the one hand, and to struggle on the streets on the other hand. And doing the connection, so which is meant as the discourse of reform and revolution very often. And so, and on the other hand, we want to use as Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung also the occasion of her 150th birthday, because of course, especially in the so-called real existing socialism, a lot of things were, you know, produced on Rosa Luxemburg how she would have meant to be or what she would have meant to be. So there was this only the stigma of the red Rosa, and she was a fighter for socialism. And so I guess we should really be happy that we can see also the person behind that much, who had like all these different aspects in her personality. And still, this is just the last thing from the position, also from the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung. There is still a lot to recover about her life, because we still have letters, Polish letters we are translating. We still find in Russian archives letters from her long-term lover, Leo Yogichis, which are not, not really read yet or used yet for the research about Rosa Luxemburg. And so we are still making our way to really finding that person. And this is where we are at the day of her 150th birthday. So thanks a lot for letting me contributing this.
Thank you very much, Johanna. You just reminded me that my personal connection with Rosa Luxemburg was going to a school 10 years that was named after Rosa Luxemburg in East Germany. So without problems, the Marxist-Leninists had with her legacy, but still she, as Johanna said, they put her in the spotlight. And every morning I passed by a bust of Rosa Luxemburg and saw her words, I was, I am, I will be, in a stained glass window behind her. So that was my everyday experience with Rosa Luxemburg as a school kid. So thank you all. It was really inspiring and so interesting. Also gave me a lot of sense in what I am doing every day in Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, and reminded me of a lot of things that we tend to forget in the daily work. So, as I said, I would like to give the panelists a chance, and also Natalia, if she'd like to react on everything you have heard, if something rang a bell with you or give you an idea that you want to share with us. The floor is open now. You can just raise your hand or give a sign, or just unmute yourself and start talking. We are not that.
So I unmute myself already. Thank you, everyone. I think it is wonderful to also have the opportunity of this space where we could hear different voices, right? Like what it means for Johanna at the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, but also I really appreciate Dana's contributions about, what it means, the legacy of Rosa and like the history and how it is really relevant for us when we look at feminism, when we look at the social movements. And I want to thank, all the partners, Cindy and Pratima, for being here. I think this is I'm super passionate about the work we do with Rosa Luxemburg, with partners, and I feel like I couldn't be prouder of like bringing those voices to be having this conversation, because you make it so relevant, right? Like I think it is so relevant of what we do in the communities, what we try to do at the UN. It is so relevant about that resistance, but also that vision, right? That transformation that in the legacy of Rosa, I think it is so vivid. So thank you, everyone. I think I'm not an expert on Rosa Luxemburg, but I think I learned a lot. And I learned also about how much alive of that vision and that transformation it is with all of us today. And I think doing the work moving forward, makes it meaningful, but also is really rejoicing that we are connected also with those ancestors, right? That started that journey for all of us for social justice and what we feel like is so important for the world today. So thank you for the contributions, and I would like to to hear reflections from everybody. But thank you, Andreas.
Thank you, Natalia. So floors to the panelists if you would like to add something to react on what the other panelists have said. So it's up to you. Maybe while you think about that, I also want to invite the attendees that we have to put their questions into the chat or into the Q&A section that you find in the bottom level. And while people still think about their questions and typing them on their keyboards, I had a question that arose to me, and I would like to put to the panelists. Where you talked about your daily struggles in Guatemala, in Nepal, in Kenya. And what is the striking connection for me with all that and Rosa's legacy is the word of internationalism. And I'd like to hear from you, from your experience, how important is it for you to know about international fights, international struggles in other parts of the world while doing your own daily fights? How is the relation between that? So if you could tell us a bit about that, whoever wants to go first. Maybe Cindy, can you tell us what it means to you to know that people in the world are also struggling their fights for freedom? Is that inspiring for you in your daily fight for your land rights, or doesn't that mean that much to you?
Thank you so much, Andreas, for your question. International struggles for example, in Congo, in Asia, in various parts of the country, indigenous people continue to struggle for their land. As Rosa joined the struggle in Latin America, and we've also seen a lot of indigenous people have lost their lives. It is encouraging because most of the other indigenous communities have been successful in the implementation of their court cases, in gaining back their land. Most other communities in, let's say, in Latin America, in the United States of America, they have been able to get access to their land, and seeing that we are not alone, it's inspiring because we are able to learn from the strategy that they've followed, from their success stories, where the good community is able to learn. Thank you. And I'd also like, I have a question for Johanna. She said that Rosa Luxemburg was not a feminist. So I'd like her to clarify that. Thank you.
Should I answer just?
Yeah, just let the conversation flow.
Well, I mean, it's a complicated question because on the other hand, if you would ask me, I would saying like, of course, you know, was she a feminist because she decided for her personal life, you know, to do all those things, studying, you know, never getting married, having relationships with different men, you know, like a lot of things, taking all these things I described already about her life, you know, that she was just, you know, taking part also in a sphere which was like a 100% men's sphere at this time in Germany. And so of course her acting was like very, very much from a feminist perspective, because there must have been like an inner positioning, you know, just to say like, it's unfair that I'm not doing this only because I'm a woman. On the other hand, she was not, and this is what really like makes, like for all the researchers, a lot of question marks. She rejected, you know, to take really part in the women's movement of this time, she was not, she was not arguing against women's rights, but she was not really focusing on them, which is kind of, and she had a lot of friends. Clara Zetkin, one of her best friends, she became in the end the icon of the socialist women's movement in Germany, and even over Europe. She became a symbol. So Rosa Luxemburg must have had all these ideas and discussed them. Female friendship was a big thing in her life, so she had very, very close friendship with women and was discussing a lot of the things with women as well. I guess that's also something we should consider and keep, and make more clear that you need that in the all-day fights we are all taking. But she was, Rosa Luxemburg was not really taking part. Dana also could add some things since she knows even better about some things about her life, but this is how I see it. And there's this very well-known situation where Louise Kautsky, also a long-term friend of Rosa Luxemburg, was riding a bicycle and had an accident. And then Rosa Luxemburg was writing to her, this happens if women want to do everything, things like riding bicycles, And there's this big question if we should interpret that as a thing that they say, that she's saying this is nothing for women at all, because riding a bicycle was like wearing trousers, voting one of the big symbols at this time, for women's emancipation.
I do want to come in quickly and just take this a really, really interesting question, and I'm grateful that you raised it. And I think I have two comebacks on that, which very much follow on from what Johanna said. First of all, I think our definition, when I say our, the kind of liberal Western definition, which is still too authoritarian, is very narrow, as it was in her time. And I think she had very early sensibility of how exclusionary it was. And bearing in mind, she wrote very early on about imperialism and colonialism and its effects. I think she understood that the bourgeoisie women of Germany who were fighting and saying, we are the most oppressed people in society. And she was kind of saying, no, you're not. There are people who are suffering the brunt of our economy and they are not visible to you. And, I teach Rosa Luxemburg to my students, and one of them said something I really liked. She said, she was intersectional before it was cool. And I think that's quite true of her. She really had that grasp of what justice means as a cohesive thing. And the other thing I want to say, and this is it actually chimes really nicely with the Louise Kautsky story. One of the interesting things in writing about her, I've been writing about her now for 6 years, and I think it will go on for a very long time. She kind of stays with you for a long time. She was full of contradictions, and she had a very turbulent life, as we know. But as women leaders, you know better than a lot of us how hard it is to be a woman in the public sphere, and that you just can't put everything to work together and to have a coherent narrative that you say, this is what I stand for, this is what I advocate. And she was absolutely an advocate of universal suffrage, for instance. She said votes for everyone, not just women. But she was very much engrossed in these contradictions of her time, both as a person who lived in a really radical and turbulent time, but also as a woman leader, which I think, for me, it's been really inspirational to hear all of you, because the struggles you're facing, she faced in a different setting, and you're picking up things that are really important. So for me, I see her as a feminist for me, because for me, feminism is very different to what other people might see as feminism. And what is published as feminist literature or as the kind of very neoliberal feminism is something that doesn't resonate with my own politics. So I think we can still keep her as a woman icon for ourselves and keep the contradictions and think of what that might mean for us today.
Thank you, Johanna and Dana. I think Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung in New York published a lovely text some years ago by our friend Priscilla Cornell about Rosa's ethical feminism. Maybe it's also kind of a practical feminism. It's a feminism by what she did. And I think that's often a lot of things in politics are about just doing things and giving the example. Would you agree, Pratima? You unmuted yourself, I see.
Thank you. Just to answer your queries, Andrea, I just wanted to say that being an activist for us, what we believe is our issues are central to us. And when we talk about indigenous people, we do have our oral history. And when we talk about why these international stories and narratives matter for us is the life of activists. There is no any time for activists. So if we do not have inspirational figures like Rosa, we cannot do our activism. It is those figures who inspire us. And sometimes if we are not able to read Rosa, then we go towards our community. And this is what inspires us. So for me, what I see as an activist is having those international stories, having those international commitments and the contributions that people have done, like Rosa in 1980s, that has still been relevant to us in today's context. If you look at the humanism, if you look at the philosophy that she has defined about what life means, about the oppressed people, about equality, those things are still relevant to us and our people. So for me and my community, I would see that those inspiring stories and the contributions that she has made to us really motivates to our work that we do at the very grassroots level for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratima. I would like to pass the question also to Anna. So what does international contacts and international exchange mean for your daily struggle? How does it influence you also in the sense of Rosa Luxemburg's internationalism?
Muchas gracias por la
Thank
la
you
pregunta.
so much for the question.
Conocer estas historias,
Well, these
conocer de
stories,
activismo en otros países a nivel
listening to the
nosotras lo vemos
activism in different countries, for us, it's a means of solidarity, sisterhood. To hear from women activists in different parts of the world, that makes us feel that we're not alone in our struggles. For example, during the armed conflict here in Guatemala, a lot of women, I was from a small town, but I remember seeing the torture, the death, people that would be on the streets from having escaped the army. From that young age, I felt like we were all alone as a Maya community, as a Ishil. And then as time went on, I started participating, organizing with different women groups, and we felt alone. We felt that no one knew about our stories. And that's how the government at that time had the press under control. They had to approve first the local news, the journalists, to be able to publish certain information. There was a lot of information that was not published, shared, and so we felt alone until now. And then when we find out that there have been women in other countries having been examples of Rosa Luxemburg, we learned that 150 years ago from her birth, there has been women that have fought for peace, for justice. And there have been women in other countries. There's organizations It's a solidarity, a sisterhood, and we also learn a lot about what have been their methods, their organizing, their support, their struggle. We also learn when there's communication, like we're doing right now. This is a very motivating event. Right here in Guatemala in 2020, it was a very, very difficult year in our country. I don't know if this will be a different topic, but I don't know if I have time for me to continue talking about these topics, or do you want me to stop? But in 2020, during the pandemic, that really impacted us a lot. The Guatemalan government implemented a lot of restrictions, having especially in the indigenous communities, a lot of criminalization. It was also because a lot of people, if people were out after the curfew, 2 minutes after the curfew, they will be sent to jail, and then they will have to pay a fine. And so they took advantage of this situation, and little by little they were, and they had these limitations on us. And then we had the storm. It was devastating for our regions. A lot of families and communities, 90% lost communications. They lost their land. And so we had, in the situation, we had to use a lot of coordination with MADRE, and to be able to coordinate and during those times, and to be able to participate here and to be here with the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. It's great to hear there's other people, there's other women that have given their life for peace. And it's world peace. It's not just for my country, it's justice, fighting for impunity, so I feel in support to be here in this space. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna, for sharing this thoughts. There haven't been questions coming in, but we had a very lovely, wonderful contribution, comment coming from another part of the world, from Eastern Europe, from Slovakia, and I would like to read that out because it also meets what we just were talking about. Darina Matskova said, "Thank you all for your wonderful insight and even more your courage and determination. Warmest regards from Ceto in brackets Slovakia. Despite official erasure of our socialist past, we remain to be internationalists and socialists at heart. I think Rosa wanted to remain to be a woman and lady, in quotation marks, and yet believed and fought for material justice and economic, not only formal electoral democracy. That makes her unique and much ahead of her time. I see her too, perhaps in line with Gandhi, that quotation, her life was her message, just like all of you. In solidarity, Darina." I think that's a wonderful message, and I wanted to share that with you. So we are on the end of the time that we planned, and we are, thanks to your wonderful discipline and talking, we are exactly at the moment when we wanted to stop. And so I don't want to extend it too much. I just have to thank, first of all of you for sharing your views, sharing your stories. It was great to hear you. It was very inspiring. And I think we draw a lot from that, and thinking new about internationalism, about intersectionalism. And I can assure you that Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung in New York and worldwide will continue to work in this sense, in the legacy of Rosa Luxemburg, and everybody is invited to join us in continuing her fights and her struggles. And I want to thank MADRE for helping us organizing this event. I want to thank Mariella for the interpretation. I know what a hard work that is. Thank you so much. And I want to thank my co-workers, Maria, for putting that all together and doing the technical support, and also Aaron for the technical support today. Thank you all. Have a good night in Nepal. Have a wonderful afternoon in Europe, and a good day to everybody in the Americas. Thank you and goodbye.